So I call a dealer in Albuquerque, and I said, hi, I'm Susan. I'm Jody Folwell's daughter. Are you interested in some pottery? He said, sure. So I said I'd ship it to him, right? I'd send it, and I wrap it up, I put it in a box, I ship it to him, and I hear nothing. And like a month later, there's a box that comes. I open it up, and there's a note attached to it that says, I can't even use these for door stops.
So I've always called you Susan Folwell, but really it sounds like Sue's really the name, or is that just for Davison gets that one?
Davison, everybody calls me Sue. Most of my family call me Susie. So that just depends, whatever you like.
But I guess from an artist standpoint, you go with more with Susan?
I do.
Yeah. So that's kind of, you're like Robert De Niro and Bob. So
Exactly.
yeah, Bob to his friend Robert De Niro as the artist. So I'll go with Susan for right now, but Susie sounds like the one I want. How are you doing? Is this at home?
I am at home. We're doing well. We're very fortunate to be in northern New Mexico during all of this. And we're very fortunate. Yeah, and to have the governor that we do.
I agree.
So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, no, it's how's the Taos Pueblo doing? Do you know?
Taos Pueblo's doing very well. They've closed all of the inroads, right? So you have to go through a border check, and you have to have, I believe like Santa Clara does, you have to have a membership card to actually get in. So they're really limiting tourism. It's absolutely come to a halt. Which is, I think is a good thing. At first, I was thinking it was kind of going to be a disaster, kind of like cruise ships, right?
Right.
They're just kind of creating this little petri dish, but no, they've done really well.
So they don't have much or any active cases in the Pueblo?
They don't. They have none.
Yeah. And how about Santa Clara?
Santa Clara has none either.
Wow. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Well, it shows if you do everything right and are really careful, you can keep it down. And, after 1918, it wiped out a good percent of the Pueblo tribes, the early pandemic, the first pandemic in America.
It did. And it actually, my grandmother had to be raised by her maternal grandmother because it took both her parents. So wow. There was a lot of shifting of Pueblo kids at that time, right? Of just rearranging of who was going to raise who, whoever was left, whoever survived. So,
yeah. So that's recent history in your family. When this came on, you're like, okay, this is the real thing. We need to take it seriously. We've been there once before.
Yep, absolutely.
And at least this time you have a little more ability to control your environment. In 1918, Native Americans couldn't even vote. They didn't get the right to vote till 1924.
Yes, and I think that also comes down to, and just, and I'm sure that was really difficult. Everybody was just living in such severe poverty. Yes. So if it was anything like what this is now, access to clean water, washing your hands all the time, keeping your face covered, would have just been near impossible.
Yeah, even if they were living in that kind of poverty, I think of the beautiful ceramic vessels, these great water jars that were made at Santa Clara specifically in that time frame, and even earlier, that were just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And do you have any of those kind of things in your own collection that came down the family?
I do. There's actually there's a section in the kitchen that has shelving. So it's all Mom's pottery, my grandmother's pottery, and my Aunt Edna's pottery. So that's kind of wonderful. We have a couple of older Santa Clara pots that we've acquired, and a few contemporary in the collection as well.
And your grandmother, who was a potter, tell us about her a little bit.
Rose Naranjo. She was such an interesting woman. She raised 10 kids basically on her own.
Wow.
She ended up raising 9 of those were hers. And kind of when somebody died, and talking about kids getting shifted around, my Aunt Louisa was one of those. Aunt Louisa is now in her 90s. early 90s. And my mother was the middle of the bunch. And
That's the famous potter, for those people who don't know, is Jody. Yep, Folwell.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that, everybody in Santa Clara makes pottery. Even if you don't do it for a living, you've always been around it, you know how to do it, or else you help family members dig clay. So saying that we learned from my grandmother was just a natural thing. My grandmother was a wonderful potter. She ended up working primarily with micaceous clay. And I think a lot of that was due to her and my grandfather, who did missionary work. They were Baptist ministers, and they built the first Baptist mission on any reservation in the US. So they did a lot of mission work here in Taos, even though they're both originally from Santa Clara Pueblo. And so my mom and her siblings actually ended up going growing up here in Taos, going to high school in Taos. And my parents met on the plaza in Taos. So there's a lot of history here.
So two Santa Clarans meet on the plaza in Taos.
My dad's actually Anglo from Denver.
Okay.
And he moved to Taos with a friend of his. So my dad's Henry Folwell, and he moved to Taos with his friend Ned Jacobs.
Oh yeah, I know Ned well.
Yeah, so another painter. And they actually saw my mom and her sister Tessie on the plaza. So they asked the girls to go get an ice cream.
And what year was this? Do you know?
So if my sister was born in 61, probably 59 or 60.
Yes, and that was in Taos at that time in the plaza, because I remember it from the 70s, even the early 70s, mid 70s. And it was very idyllic and, slow paced and, just a local New Mexican plaza, really. It's not like you see it or feel it today, I don't think.
Yeah, no, it was, and it still kind of is. I mean, Taos has to be a destination. It's just in the middle of nowhere. So I think that's what kind of keeps it still very homey.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
And was your dad, was he an artist as well?
Yes, he's a painter. He still paints, and he'll work on pottery on occasion. He and mom will do collaborations, which is a lot of fun to see. His artwork, he never really pursued selling in galleries, but he's produced some beautiful, beautiful things. So I'm very lucky in that way.
Is it in a Pueblo kind of style, or is it different? His work?
His work is, he moved into abstract work, but initially when he was here, he did some beautiful paintings of local Taos Pueblo people, or open fields, right? Lamb and sheep in open fields, horses and things. So it just depends. And then later when he moved into more abstract work, a lot of mountain scenery.
And your mom, was she always a potter? I mean, as far as I can always remember, I remember her name and being a potter and that kind of thing. But is that true? Was she making a living as a potter the whole time, or did she have to do something else as well?
She actually went to law school, and she went to law school in Pennsylvania. There was a very brief time, and I was very, very young. I might have been like 6 years old when she was still in law school in Pennsylvania. And my dad was working in a candle factory at the time. And she came back. They just missed New Mexico so much. They just decided to come back home. And then I believe that she did another brief school time, was it as a civil engineer? So then she became a school teacher for a while and just decided to start making pottery for the weekends and selling off the portal. And that's when, and she started doing almost immediately asymmetrical shapes, different types of firing, right? So nobody had ever seen that before. And it took a while. I think it took a couple of years before she actually met Lee Cohen.
What year was she doing the starting with this asymmetrical pottery? Do you remember?
I would say that was probably mid to late, maybe late 70s.
Uh-huh. And she was selling these under the portal, the in Santa Fe?
Yeah, under the Palace of the Governors.
Yeah. Is there any
And
photos of her doing that? That would be a wonderful thing. There must be, because everyone takes photos, but they just probably don't recognize it's Jody Folwell underneath there.
right. And I think back then as well, it was such a big deal to take a picture and then to develop your film
Yeah.
and all of that. So I'm sure there's something in the world. I think one of the earliest photos I've actually found of her, it's not in my possession, but you can find it online. Or my Aunt Tessie, actually, she's a good archivist in keeping family photos. But probably the early 80s of Mom on the plaza at Indian Market,
Uh-huh.
and her holding a first place ribbon for a pot she did.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah.
And so she immediately, the clay just said, I want to be this. And she didn't make the typical symmetrical pots, but she made these different forms. And that was right off the bat.
That was right off the bat. And what I've always found amazing is to watch her make pottery, because it's something that comes so natural to her. It's just innate inside of her. I mean, she can do it with her eyes closed, her hands tied behind her back, right?
Yeah.
She could be sitting there just molding with her feet and it'd be good. So the rest of us have to struggle a bit.
Well, you still got to put in your dues. You've only been doing it probably for 35 or 40 years.
Yes, and it still hasn't come that easy to me.
So she meets Lee Cohen of Gallery 10. Where does she meet him?
He actually sees her work on under the portal in Santa Fe.
Wow.
So he hands her a business card, and I remember the day we got home from the plaza. So my cousin Jody and I, well, I'm gonna backtrack a little bit. So Mom and my Aunt Dolly Naranjo,
Yes.
would go. We'd go to the portal on weekends. They would sell, and my cousin Jody Naranjo and I,
Yes.
Jody, who was named after my mother, Jody,
Yes.
who's also a very good potter. Jody and I would run around like little cretins, right? We were 10, 11, 12 years old, and we'd walk to DeVargas Mall and go to the movies and whatnot. But I remember that day that we all came home, and Mom was so excited because she said, she was talking to my dad, and she said, I met the most fascinating man, and I have a feeling he's going to change our lives forever. And she was talking about Lee Cohen, because Lee was talking about starting a gallery. So that's how all of that began. He was in Santa Fe, I guess you would say, doing recruiting, looking around.
Finding artists.
Yep, finding artists. So, and he did.
That's amazing. So she was there from the very beginning with Lee when he opened Gallery 10. And she was right. I mean, it did change, I think, her life probably.
It changed the life. I mean, I think honestly, the scope is so much greater than that, because it started with a handful of artists, literally taking them off the curbside, native artists, and getting them into a gallery setting, right. Letting people know, educating people that this is real art. This right. is something. So it definitely, the tentacles, the fingers have spread to the rest of the Indian art world, and we're all pretty grateful for that.
That's a very interesting story. I hadn't heard that or didn't know that. And so your mom starts showing with Lee, and then does she really embrace this different slips, different shapes at that point, and that becomes who she is? Do you think as an artist that's her voice from that point on?
I think so. And also her ability to, she always wants to learn more. She always wants to know more. So experimentation has always been part of it. And like I said, she's such a natural at it. So I think it lent for a very good combination in what was the beginning of contemporary Pueblo pottery.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I would think that she's right there. I mean, she I mean, who else would you put into that group? I mean, Tony Day, I guess, is doing things about that same time frame. Who else?
Um,
Popovy too,
that's
I guess.
yeah, that's another interesting question. You know, Joseph Lone Wolf, maybe you
Yeah.
could put in that category. Art Hungua,
Mm-hmm.
uh, but a lot of that was also still, if you look at the three of those artists, that was all still highly red polished. It was sgraffito work.
Right.
It wasn't the asymmetrical or the firing techniques that had changed, that mom had introduced. That was the black and red firings, brown firings, green slips. I think Tony might have used some green slips as well.
Well,
Um,
I know they did, Poe started using sienna in about 1964, I think, is when
yeah,
his first, which he called caramel colored. And he goes, I don't know if I like this name, but this is what it is. It's a caramel colored pot. But nobody did asymmetry that I can think of. Yeah, your mom probably was the first one to really do asymmetry. I mean, now, it's kind of a mainstay of contemporary Pueblo pottery, I think, to some extent.
yeah, certainly. And then adding to the fact that then she'd start to do social commentary
Yes.
on pots. Um, you know, talking about experiences that she's had or feminist issues, you name it, and then getting into political. And she will even tell you it was so radical at the time. I think when she started to do political pieces, that's when clients really kind of started to back off.
Mm,
They didn't know what they were looking at, or they didn't like the message she was sending.
right.
So
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, I can see it from both points. And I think that's kind of how it all is, right? I mean, when Pollock started with his abstract, expressionists, I'm sure a lot of people said, this is hogwash. It's a bunch of
oh
drips
yeah.
of paints. What am I supposed to get out of this? And and not to mention when she's making these political statements, especially for feminists, that's a lot of the people at that time are housewives. And so she's breaking from the tradition of what is, tradition, I guess. She probably caught some grief even in the Pueblos, didn't she?
She would have gotten, she would have gotten a lot of flack from the Pueblos, but I think having such a strong personality,
Yeah,
and then if you look at also sort of the broader scope of things, her siblings as well did a lot of groundbreaking things on their own. So the Naranjos just tended to be kind of a middle finger up in the air to the rest of the world quite often, right?
yeah,
Back then. So in a strange way, whether they were having dialogue about it or not, um, it was just, it was an energy. It was a thing, right? It was kind of a Naranjo thing.
yeah. Is it still kind of a Naranjo thing?
It's still kind of a Naranjo thing. I gotta admit.
And so now did you grow up at Santa Clara Pueblo?
I did. Born and raised Santa Clara Pueblo. It was a great childhood, right? You'd run to school in the morning, and then run back after school and run past through the ditch and through the orchards, and the kids would play, make mud pies, and
Right. And when did
yeah.
you start making pottery? When did you first, the clay start speaking to you? I mean, I read something about the snake. I'll let you tell that story, maybe.
Yes, I made a little snake when I was very young. I don't know, I was like 6 years old, and mom said, it has to have a little more character. So she pinched the nose of my snake, and I got so upset because I wanted my snake just to be the way it was. But pottery came to me much later in time. I knew I always wanted to be an artist, but I didn't want to work in clay. I really, growing up, having to do clay was doing chores, right? If I was
Right.
going to go to the movies with my friends, I had to finish sifting clay. I had to help collect manure. I had to help chop wood for the firing. So, in my mind, I equated that, why would I grow up and do chores for a living? Right? It didn't make any sense to
Yeah.
me. So I did end up going to art school.
You went to a private school, or you went to Idlewood too, right, for high school?
I went to Idlewild.
Right.
It's a high school art school in California, and I majored in painting, but changed my major to photography. I absolutely fell in love with photography. I could not get enough. So I ended up going to an industrial design school in Detroit.
Right. That was for college though, right?
Yep.
But
Where I
let me ask about this high school. How did you end up at Idlewild? I mean, how did that happen? I mean, that's a big jump from, Santa Clara Pueblo to this school. That,
Well, I actually, I almost haven't lived on the reservation, or I should say I've lived on and off since I was 16. I ended up going to a girls' Catholic school in Colorado when I was 16.
mm,
So after that, it was that same year. So either that year or the year after that, Mom actually taught a pottery class with Juan Quisada
mm,
at Idlewild for their summer programs.
mm.
And that's when I heard that they were starting a high school art school that following year, but they were also going to do a postgraduate program, meaning, you could be a couple of years out of high school to work on a portfolio to get you into college. So that's the route I wanted to take. And I was already knee deep in high school. So I ended up getting my GED and going in as a postgraduate and taking art classes there. So instead of it was fabulous because instead of going and studying, learning at school, I was in this fabulous place. I could just do art all day long. So it was really wonderful.
You were doing your profession. You found your calling right there, probably, didn't you?
I did. And I actually took a ceramics class because I thought it was going to be an easy A, right? I was like, you know what?
And they said, here's a wheel. This way you use a wheel.
Right, exactly. I was like, what do I do with this? What is this? So I passed by the skin of my teeth.
That's funny. That's really funny.
Yeah, yeah. It was like a D plus or something. I mean, it was just a terrible, terrible grade. But yeah, no, it was a great experience, and it was actually that ceramics class. I really didn't enjoy it at all. But what it did teach me, though, I mean, it took me that long to really understand how much I appreciated my culture
Right.
and how much I appreciated the process, the traditional process of gathering the clay, making it, having had learned from my mother, my sister, my grandmother. So it really instilled that one class, that D plus class, really instilled something in me. And it just had to sit dormant for a few more years, but yeah.
And so you went from there to Detroit, right? To the Art Center. What was the name of in Detroit?
Center for Creative Studies. It's behind the Detroit Institute of the Arts, the museum there, and across from Wayne State.
And why there? Why Detroit?
I had applied to a number of colleges. I was offered a presidential scholarship to San Francisco Art Institute, which I didn't take. And then Chicago Art Institute was willing to give me a 20%. But it was my teacher at the time who was helping me with my college applications, Barbara Lemick. She talked me through it. And she thought that my personality probably, I'd need a much greater challenge. So we both agreed on Detroit.
And was it the right move, you think?
I think so. I really enjoyed being in an industrial design element. In school, just there's a certain frame of thought, I think, that is different than a more liberal arts school.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it did suit me well. And coming from going to high school in Espanola, I was well suited to be in Detroit.
Yeah, I get that. I spent a summer in Detroit working at a hospital there too, in inner city Detroit area.
Yeah.
And I spent time in Espanola, so I understand both. Maybe not high school, but I understand.
Yeah.
So when you
So
were in Detroit, were you focusing on photography at all at that point?
photography was my main focus, and it was a really steep learning curve. It was really, really good for me, but you had to go back and redo all the basics all over again, even though, and it was necessary, honestly. Learning all the basics, 2D, 3D, drawing, painting, everything, just at a higher level.
And how
So
long did that program last? How long was that?
I ended up I was there for 2 years. And then my sister got pregnant with my niece, Ka, who's also a potter, turning into a very fine potter in her own right. She's almost 30. But my sister got pregnant, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to take a year off. I'd love to be with Polly and the baby and spend time with them. I'll come back.
All right.
And that was it.
Yeah, I know, right? It's hard to go back once you leave. It really is.
It really, really is. And I hear that from a lot of people, or else, they're so close to graduating and you're just like, I'll come back, I'll do it. So I think the moral of the story is just get it done, get it over.
Done. That's right. Because you're at this point, when you come back, you're what, maybe 23, 22?
Yep.
Yep. And
Yep.
so you come back to New Mexico. And
Yep.
so what do you do when you're back here? How are you supporting yourself?
How did I support myself? So I was back in Santa Clara for a year. I think I was doing odd jobs. And then I had applied to go to school at the Kansas City Art Institute. So I actually ended up moving to Kansas. And I actually got a job in a photo and video store when those things were still alive.
Mm-hmm.
That was like, that was the last hurrah of photography, really.
Right.
The age of photography. Just doing old school, and digital was just coming out.
So were you developing film and that kind of thing?
Developing film, selling camera and video equipment to people. And that was, even though I lived in KCK, that was inner city, I worked in Johnson County. So we had that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of football players, baseball players' wives that would come in and develop their film, right?
And were you doing school then too? Did you do the Kansas City? Because that's why you went out there, right?
Yeah. And you know what? I ended up, I was so broke. I was so broke. There was no way I could do both. It just kind of seemed like all I could do to survive. So that was an interesting little detour living in Kansas. I had a good friend who was there, who lived around the corner from me. And actually the friend that lived there, I had first met her that first summer that Mom did the pottery class at Idlewild. She was one of Mom's students. And she ended up becoming a very, very good friend of the family. She was a inner city, Kansas City school teacher who taught art. And eventually when she retired, she moved to New Mexico. She moved to Chimayo. So she taught kids there for a couple of years before she ended up dying of cancer. But really wonderful woman. So that was a great, it was just, it's one of those detours in your life that somehow happened.
Right. Were you making art at all at that time?
I think what ended up happening was I was so broke, even though I was working full time. I had asked Mom, and the Indian art business was booming here in New Mexico. So I asked Mom if she would send me a box of clay. I'm like, you know what? I grew up doing this. How hard can it be? So there I am teaching myself, right, how to make pottery, working with Santa Clara clay, taught myself how to polish all over again. So, you shut the bathroom if you want to keep, humidity, right? If you want to learn to polish evenly, as you're doing your polishing stroke, so it doesn't dry up on you. You turn the shower on, right? Close the toilet lid, and you're sitting there on the toilet with the shower running, right? Polishing your pottery.
Wow,
So,
this sounds like it's really anybody who wants to be a ceramist says it's a glory job. It's kind of like being an art dealer. I always say to people when I'm hanging a painting, struggling on a thing, yeah, it's great. It's such a great job.
yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, this is so awesome. And so I'm like, you know what? Everybody knows my mother. I'm going to use my mother's name to get my foot in the door, and I'll keep going from there. So I call a dealer in Albuquerque, and I said, hi, I'm Susan. I'm Jody Folwell's daughter. Are you interested in some pottery? He said, sure. So I said I'd ship it to him, right? I'd send it, and I wrap it up, I put it in a box, I ship it to him, and I hear nothing, right? And I'm just waiting, and I'm waiting. I'm like, well, do I call him? What do I do? And like a month later, there's a box that comes to me.
Pottery coming back.
And I open it up, and there's a note attached to it that says, I can't even use these for door stops.
Oh my God. Do you want to say who that dealer was?
Oh, I don't. I don't.
Yeah. Wow. That's brutal. I mean, that's absolutely brutal to do that to somebody, quite frankly. What did you take from that? I mean, that's not.
You know what? It was absolutely perfect. All of that was the perfect storm. Being so broke, being on what felt like the other side of the planet, it really lit a fire under me.
I bet. Well, it either lights a fire or it extinguishes it.
Right.
That's
right.
the problem.
So yeah, that was the other kind of catalyst of just, I was like, watch me. He's going to regret this. Watch me. So he eventually did.
Did he make his amends ever and say something? So I was wrong. No.
Never.
What'd your mom say? What'd your mom say to that? I'm sure you called her and said, my God, this is what this guy said.
Yeah, I can't remember what she said. I'm sure it was something comforting, as I'm weeping and crying over the phone, and
I'm sure
sniffling and snorking and whatnot. But I'm certain we had the conversation of, just send me more clay. And I did, and I learned to fire. I don't know how many pots I blew up in the backyard, right in the middle of the inner city, right? It's amazing. I didn't burn half of Kansas City down.
Yeah.
So yet another sharp learning curve.
So you're making these pots. You're trying to become an artist at this point in a different field, which is your family tradition. Really, it's your family business in some respects. And so when you leave Kansas, how long did you stay there? Where'd you go
I was only there for a couple of years, and then I ended up moving back to Santa Clara, and I ended up. So it can get a little hazy because I've done a lot of moving around, and after that was a lot of moving around northern New Mexico. So staying or renting an apartment for, a year or two, and then moving to somewhere else and whatnot. But it was after that, once I ended up moving back home, and I taught myself how to make pottery. And part of that too, that experience in Kansas was the place that I worked, the people were actually fairly racist. They said some terrible, terrible, terrible things about their customers, and I could only imagine how they felt about me.
Right.
I think I was actually hired to meet some quota, honestly. And I worked there for exactly a year, and part of that was just saying, you know what, I'm never going to work for anyone ever again. That I'm going to work for me. I'm never going to do this ever again. It had put such a bad taste in my mouth. So that impetus with the note that's saying I can't use these for doorstops, it turned into kind of the perfect storm for me to, really light a fire under me and do it right.
And so when you come back to Santa Clara, you start making pottery, and then was there a point there fairly soon after that you did find outlets to sell your artwork, whether it's Indian Market or other galleries?
I did. I did a lot of hustling in the way that I'd go visit friends in Arizona, and literally I would open a phone book and, you know, look for Indian art, anything Indian art, and just make phone calls, you know, just keep calling, calling, calling. I did the same thing in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. I'd make trips to Colorado and do the same thing, you know, kind of hold up somewhere and then open a phone book, right?
Yeah.
And then just start calling people. So, yes, eventually I got myself into a number of doors. And then slowly, once I started to have a bit of a name, once I was making money, I was able to scale back a bit and just start focusing on, you know, just kind of really just focusing on what my style might be. And I took a lot from, initially, I took a lot from both my mother and my sister's styles. You have to learn from somewhere. You have to grow from somewhere. So I think after that point, a couple of years in a number of galleries, I ended up really started just thinking about what is my style? What is it that I want to do? What is it that really makes me happy to continue to keep doing this? So I think that's when I really started to work on it. And I, you know, booths at Indian Market, Santa Fe Indian Market, have been for a number of years generational. So I remember being a kid and watching my mother and my grandmother in the booth, you know, and the people sitting next to us who were jewelers from Santo Domingo, right? They were the grandparents and their children and their grandchildren were in their booth. So I bring that up. Now I lost my point.
So it's generational. So the question is it still generational at Indian Market as far as the booths go? They've changed that, I guess, right?
Yes. So when I finally, you know, I was at a point of sharing, you know, my first time sharing my mother's booth as an artist, you know, as opposed to just sitting there as a spectator or
Right.
as a young child, that I'm actually an artist myself, and I enter for the first time for judging, and ended up winning a first place ribbon. So that was a really fantastic validation of all of that struggle, you know, from the first time I received that note
Yeah.
to that point in time.
For that ribbon. When was that ribbon? Do you know?
I think it was 90, I think it was 91.
Yeah. Well, I actually, my kids, we would take, because I was always in Santa Fe, I had a gallery there for 20 years, and I'm a New Mexican. I'm a, you know, a native New Mexican. And so I've been going to the Indian Market forever. And one of the things I always used to do with my children is an Indian Market, I'd give them a budget of a few hundred to whatever it might be, and they could pick out one piece and go around and find that piece. And one year it was one of your mom's pieces.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so we have it. You know, I think it was my son that picked that out. Yes. So the tradition, there is a tradition bond there. And for me, you know, it's really interesting about Indian Market, how important it is to not only Native Americans, but I think just to society as a whole. I know it's really important to me. And I'm really interested because I know you're a part of that too. You're on the board of SWI, aren't you?
I used to be.
Yeah. So are you going to be involved in the virtual show that's going to go on?
I won't be this year. I didn't apply for Indian Market this year. I've got a space inside of Charles King's gallery.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. I've seen your stuff too. It's fantastic.
So I just thought it's probably just stretching myself a little too thin if I did Market this year. And then, but who knew all of this was happening, right? Who knew this was going to,
Right.
COVID would be a part of the equation.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no one could see it for sure.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about that, about your work that is at Charles right now. So at Charles King Gallery, it is phenomenal. I really love the whole concept of what you're doing. And, you know, I'm really, I wish I could see it in person just to feel the thickness of those tablets that you've done and, you know, the imagery and the painting. Tell us a little bit about how that all came about and what is the inspiration for that.
Well, part of this series goes back to when Davison and I, so I was in Arizona for 15 years. I met my husband there.
Yeah, what were you doing in Tucson?
Um, that was just another, I wanted a change of pace. I didn't want to move to Santa Fe. I definitely didn't want to move to Albuquerque. But I just wanted something different. So my very good friends who were there in Tucson, they're like, come stay with us, find an apartment. You're selling pottery here in Arizona. It's not like you need to, figure it out.
Right.
And just stay for a while. So I ended up staying for 15 years. Found an apartment downtown. I love Tucson. It kind of reminded me of kind of a combination of like, Santa Fe, like in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It was just some kind of, downtown was the weird throwback. It was awesome. I loved it. And I loved being in the desert. So, and as you know, Tucson's a pretty special place.
Yeah, it is. It reminds me a great deal of Santa Fe. And I always have a hard time articulating why, but there is a sense of both places. I think part of it is the environment with the mountains, that we care about the environment. And also it's very arty. There's a lot of art culture in Tucson.
There is. And, there's a lot of, and native culture is still very prevalent in Tucson as well. So
Absolutely.
That made me feel, it felt like home, home away from home.
Yeah, there's a similarity, no doubt. And so were you making pottery the whole time you were in Tucson?
I was.
And supporting yourself as a potter? That's how you were making your living the whole time?
Yes. And by that time, excuse my croaky voice.
That's okay.
By that time, I had already been selling near exclusively to Charles King of King Galleries. I had also been with Blue Rain for a number of years. So there was a point where I was with the two galleries, but I was also feeling stretched thin because I produced so few pieces in 1 year, right? Then all of a sudden actually building a body of work to support, to be in two separate galleries. So I made a decision to stick with Charles. Charles and I, we're close to the same age, and we kind of started off in the business together. Mm-hmm. He comes from a gallery family.
Right.
So that's also kind of a handed down tradition as well, in a strange way. So, and we met, I was 24 years old when I met Charles. So Charles was like 26, 27, right? He was super excited because he was starting a gallery and he was starting to introduce himself to artists, and it was a lot of fun. So I just kind of felt like we had grown up together, and we'll just keep doing it together till we get too old to stop doing it.
Well, you've got a lot more time to go on that. I can assure you. You haven't even hit your prime yet. You've got best potters probably don't hit it until they're about 65 or 70. So
this is true. I mean, I don't ever see myself retiring. Honestly, I don't even know what that would look like or what form that would take. But I brought that up just being in Tucson. So then having had moved back to New Mexico, and my husband getting a job with the Couse Foundation.
Yeah, but speaking of your husband, do you want to, he told us how you met. I don't know if you want to give your side of the story, because I know his side of the story of always looking up, first of all, in the tree. Yeah, right. And something about giving 2 tickets to TMA, a Tucson Museum of Art opening, and you wanted to see if he came alone or with another person. You want to talk about that a little?
Oh yeah, never underestimate a woman being crafty. So he was just the cutest thing, I swear. You saw his red ginger hair, but it had grown out quite a bit, so it reminded me of Barry Gibb. He looked just like Barry Gibb. Right, and his brother's an arborist, so he used to trim trees on the side, in Tucson. So of course I'd walk outside, I'd watch him. He was trimming trees in the yard. We had mutual friends, which is how he got hired. The guy that ran my apartment complex was a yoga instructor with another yoga instructor that worked at the museum Davison worked at. So I do everything I could, right? I'd walk outside and be like, oh, do you need some ice water? Oh, good morning. Do you need coffee? Right? He's not taking the bait. He's not doing any of it. And this had been going on for like over a week. So finally, like, I'm like, okay, let's, whatever. He's clearly not interested, even in a conversation. I realize he's busy working, however. So I finally take my trash out, right? And Davison's like, she looks so familiar. So he asks Greg, and little did he know it was me that he hung the photo of, the 6-foot photo at the museum at their permanent pottery collection, right?
The man. That's a man thing right there, just oblivious.
Right. So as I'm walking back, right, just, my head hanging low, back to my apartment, he says, excuse me, are you Susan Folwell? And I wish there was a photo of my face right at that moment. I could feel my Cheshire cat grin, right? I looked up at him while he's on the roof. I'm like, well, yes, I am.
And now he becomes more interested in the girl that he picked out for the photo for the show on Pottery. And so
right.
You gave him a couple of tickets to see level of interest?
I did. I had bought 4 tickets to my godson's school fundraiser that was at the Tucson Museum of Art. So I gave him 2 tickets. I was like, if he comes alone, that's great. If he's with someone, then he's with someone that I know. Right. So he ended up showing up by himself. Took me about 10 seconds to see him walk through the door, and he didn't have a chance. We had a lovely evening together. And then, of course, Tucson Museum of Art was like 2 blocks from my house, but I was like, oh, you know what? I don't have a ride home. Do you mind? So he gives me a ride home. And at the time, I had 2 tickets to Etta James. So I asked him if he wanted to go to Etta James with me. Yes.
Very, very good. That's that Naranjo in you, right?
Sure is. That craftiness. Yeah. No doesn't mean no.
So you guys and how long have you guys been married now?
We just had our 10-year wedding anniversary.
Very nice. Very nice.
And it was a first, it was worth the wait. Neither one of us had been married before, no children. Neither one of us brought children to the marriage. It's been a wonderful 10 years.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because he's a sculptor, which I didn't really realize until I interviewed him. So he gets to have his sculpture around him at all times with a ceramicist, which is really a wonderful pairing, I think.
It's so much fun, and we get to collaborate on so many things. Whether it's art or what something needs to look like, or concepts for the foundation, or what it is I should be working on, or how things what I need to do to tweak something. It's a lot of fun.
And that collaboration, it shows in what's going on with your current work, right?
Right, which goes back to when Davison first got the job at the Couse-Sharp Foundation at the site. It was so nice to be back in New Mexico, to be immersed in New Mexican art and culture. That's if people, it's a whole separate thing. If you've never been here, it's a whole nother world, and it's a really wonderful world. But I became inspired by the Taos Society of Artists, and learning more about them. I had known of them, but really just kind of being at the foundation, getting to know the foundation better, and becoming inspired by Joseph Henry Sharp and E.I. Couse, and then learning about the other TSA members. Just something clicked about their imagery. And I've always, I've done a lot of social commentary on my work. So it was just kind of a natural next step to take a look at their work and be inspired by their work, and to kind of, play off the irony of, 100 years later, a Native American actually, um, working with and working through the TSA. So it just inspired. I haven't stopped yet working on images, working through images of all the members of the Taos Society. So sometimes that dictates shapes of mine, sometimes not. It still feels like talking about art school, right? Because that's one of the things you do in art school is you study the masters. Mm-hmm. And that's how you keep improving and growing as an artist, is to study someone superior to yourself. And I ended up having a show at the Harwood, which was not well thought out on my part, because when they'd asked me to do a show there, I thought, okay, you know what? We can borrow some TSA paintings for, throughout New Mexico. We can borrow Buck Dutton's, we can borrow Couse's, we can borrow Blumenshine's work, and hang it up and put my pots next to some of the paintings. Right. And then I realized, that was either going to be a really big disaster, right? Because you're literally putting your own work next to masterworks.
Yes. Well, and you have that Victor Higgins there at the Harwood, which is one of the picture of the mortuary of the burial with the dark clouds, that I think is one of the greatest paintings ever painted. And yeah, it would be tough to put yourself against one of the greatest paintings done in Taos ever, in my opinion.
Yes. So like I said, on my part, that was not well thought out. However, the exhibit just turned out beautifully. And that's kind of the whole point. One of the things I've always enjoyed is just a play on play on play. So if you're looking, and I like for my pots to be read kind of like a book. So being able to find those subtleties, those nuances of what's going on. And particularly if, you have a particular TSA painting that you want to.
Well, I like the rabbit hunt one, the burning house one that you made like a sack, kind of a rabbit sack. Tell people about that. Maybe we can get a picture from Charles and put it up as well.
Yes, and actually that was kind of, one of the pots I was thinking of. The original painting had been agreed to go on loan for that particular exhibit. So I had made that pot in mind of that but in the end, it ended up getting pulled, and we used a different image. But I thought it would be kind of wonderful to put the image on what would it look like, a rabbit sitting in a sack, right? Once the rabbit was caught, right, what would that look like? So I did the rabbit sack, and there's and I tied a leather strap to the top, and of course the top where it's tied is kind of hanging over. It's a really small opening. So to make sure the pot dried properly without cracking, I'd actually cut a hole in the back side. And once the pot was done, I ended up patching a little suede patch on the back, and then making little X's so it looks like it was stitched on, right?
Really cool.
Like it was a worn sack. And things like that are so much fun to do. I really, really enjoy doing stuff like that. Have you seen the roll of film that's at Charles King's?
I did. I love that. I mean, I've seen it online. I haven't seen it, in person. I can't get to New Mexico. I was supposed to be there for the whole month of July, and we got, quarantined out. So yeah. The first year in 30 years, I haven't been to Santa Fe for the summer at all. But I saw it on the website, and yeah, tell me about that.
So that actually. So one of the things at the gallery, we did a giclée replica of one of Couse's nocturne paintings that's on permanent display at the Couse Foundation. So that's hanging up on the wall, since it's a whole TSA series that's in the gallery. And then this image, right? Yes. I love this image. And this is the image that Henry Sharp took this photograph. So it's one of.
Who's the model?
I think it's Jerry Mirabal under there.
Yeah, it could be Jerry Marble. And so for the people who are not watching this, but listening to it, it's an image of a Taos Indian in a trade blanket, Pendleton blanket actually, looking at a easel that one would assume is that Sharp's easel?
It's Sharp's easel.
Yeah. And so you took that image and what did you do with that?
That's blown up. I mean, it's such a wonderful image of him critiquing the painting. So I wanted to do yet another kind of play on play on play on play, which is I actually built a canister of film out of clay. And the roll of film, the actual film that's coming out, it's coming out in a ribbon. And there's a couple of images of this same image on that roll of film. Right? So it's the roll of film that had taken the photo of him critiquing Sharp's work, right?
Yeah. You've got to have that backstory to really get the whole sense. I mean, I loved the image. I loved the pot just because I thought it was very unique and cool, and I'd never seen anything quite like that. But with the background story that even adds to it, that's very interesting. And I wonder if, I don't know if that's up on the website, the image of the photograph of Jerry looking at the easel, but it will be soon, I hope.
Yes, that's a good question. I don't know if it is.
And how hard was that to fire, by the way? I wondered about that, how hard that was to make something like that, just from a technical standpoint.
It's, a friend saw it on Instagram and sent her congratulations, and I think I sent back a whole bunch of expletives. And I'm like, I'm so glad that's over with.
Yeah.
And at the time, just being like, I'll never do that again. Now that I've calmed down a bit, I'm going to make one, I think 2 to 3 times the size. So I'm going to keep going with that.
I love it. I thought it was one of the most unique things in the whole show. Yeah, that was my take.
Yeah. So that was a lot of fun to do. And how the iPhones, so I'm working on a series of iPhones that have Taos Society of Artists imagery on them. And the iPhones are basically tiles, right? They're made out of clay, right. And they're slabs of tiles. Most are in and or around the size of an iPhone. Some kind of sort of the size of an iPad. But the thought of that was, so by the time this concept arrived, or how it came to me, was we were already in the first phases or coming out of the lockdown of COVID. So just kind of wondering about that and what can I do with my art, that I wanted to make tiles, but I just didn't want to make just tiles and leave it at that. So I thought about a series of virtual vacation. So nobody can leave their house, right? So this is their virtual vacation they're taking this summer to Taos to see Taos Society of Artists paintings with their iPhone, right? And they're a great size because then you just order a whole bunch of iPhone stands. So there's your iPhone sitting on your iPhone stand, and it's a piece of art. It's a lot of fun. I have one with me that I actually finished on my birthday. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, that's very cool. So for the people who are looking at it, it's a tile, Pueblo pottery tile, but the image is of an iPhone. It's a Victor Higgins kind of imagery.
It is.
Yeah, which a chief's blanket and a hollyhocks in a vessel, and you have the push button and the date, which is June 20th, the power bars, the camera, and the flashlight. That's fantastic, and that's the size of a little bigger. What's the back look like? I want to see the back too.
The back has.
Oh yeah, so the back. So this is a newer phone because we have the newer camera style and an apple eaten out. We won't say it's an iPhone apple, but it's a apple. It's an Indian apple. So
it's an Indian apple.
Yeah, so Apple can't do anything about that.
Right.
That's wonderful. And so, how much does something like that sell for?
Depending on the size, of course, and the amount of time put into it. These run anywhere from $600 to $1,200.
Yeah, they're just wonderful. I think.
And they're a lot of fun. And once I started to make them, I started to realize, I mean, at some point you want to mix and match them, right?
Absolutely. Those work in groups right there. Those are things that I see as multiples. quite.
They're very playful. I mean, I think the possibilities with this series are endless. And it's a lot of fun to do.
So is that one that's in the show, in Charles's show? The one you just showed me?
Charles hasn't even seen this yet.
I'm trying to buy it, is what I'm trying to do. Tell Charles he has to sell that one to me.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah.
So I just finished a series of black and white images, iPhone images, and which then included the film canister, right? And the actual film, the image of the film itself is all in black and white. So it's a lot of fun.
And is that one's in the studio, or it's fired and done? The one you're just talking about?
That one's at King Galleries.
Yeah, that one is at King Gallery. So what's next for you? Do you know? You have a plan of action? What's headed after? Well, I mean, because this could go on for a while, right? I mean, I don't anticipate this easing up anytime soon. We're toward July 15th or 16th today, and I would anticipate this goes. Next year, we'll have the same conversation on the same Zoom camera.
I would say yes. Yeah, this is going to go on for quite a while. Excuse me. So what I'm working towards now, I'll still keep working on my iPhone series, but the next new big challenge for me is working with nocturnes. I think that'll be another leap of faith. That'll be a real test of what I've learned so far. What the vessel is going to look like with those nocturnes, I haven't quite decided yet.
Yeah, very difficult. Those are very difficult. Having sold nocturnes, painting wise, they do have a challenge.
Yes, it's so that's the bar that I've set for myself. I've also my medium, my painting medium has changed a bit. I've discovered watercolor, and I like the way that it's able to blend. I'm fascinated the way it soaks into the clay. I end up sealing it with actually a lacquer and or a wood stain, and I've been working with wood stain for years, so I know how that applies and how that works to clay. But this being a low firing clay, there's absorption. So
my tile that you showed, you notice I use the word my tile. What kind of paints were used on that?
So all of this is watercolor.
Wow, you would never know that.
No.
And it's not a gouache, it's a watercolor.
It's watercolor.
Yeah, interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
So I'll keep that one out of the light.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, that's what's in store, and I see this TSA going on for quite a while, and I'm really enjoying working with new, difficult, challenging shapes as well, fun shapes. So
and
yeah.
For people who don't know, TSA means the Taos Society of Artists. It's not a code word for some kind of FFA thing, it's
transportation security.
It's a group of individuals that started the Taos Founders in 1915 and went to 22 or 23 or something like that. And so anything else? I do have a question, because you've had a long road to become a successful artist. You had a lot of things that you had to overcome. What would you tell young artists that are considering, going down this field? What advice would you give them?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Just do the work. It'll pay off. It really will. If you're passionate about art, you'll get there eventually. It's not an easy route. It's not easy now. I don't expect it to be easy in the future. But if you're passionate, it'll definitely work itself out. And I think for Native artists, I'm really excited to see the next generation, because when we were talking about my mother and how much flack she got, and really paving the way, I've heard other potters they would come up to me and say, I'm so grateful for your mother. I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing now if she didn't take that initial step to become an individual. And I say that because, raised in a Pueblo, in a Native society, you're not meant to show individual expression. It's about the people. It's about the community.
Right.
So that's where, having that individual expression, you can do both. You can still keep the traditions, but you can still have your independent voice along with it. And I think that should be remembered by young artists, particularly Native artists.
Well, you definitely have your individual voice. There's no doubt about it. And you're still creating and coming up with concepts that other people haven't thought about. And to me, that's the most important thing I look at for an artist, is someone who has that originality, that voice that stands out alone. Yeah, and you can have all the ability in the world as an artist, technically, but if you don't have that voice, to me, that you didn't catch the tide, you didn't get on that wave, and you left it on you didn't put it all out there, and clearly you've put it all out there.
Oh, thank you, Mark.
So it's been thrilling to have you on. I really enjoyed getting to talk to you today and just learning a little bit more about your family and how you like people that climb trees and clean branches.
And how that pays off as well, to be tenacious.
And I'm pretty sure, I'm 100% sure this is the first podcast I've done where I'm actually bought something on the podcast. Tell Charles he can't sell that. It's got to come to me.
Awesome, Mark. Will do.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you. And we'll get an update later. And I look forward to following your career and talking to you again, and maybe getting to see you next time in Taos.
Well, that would be great. You and Kathleen stay well, healthy and well.
We will.
We hope to see you soon.
All right. Thank you. All right, Stu. Bye-bye.
Bye.
We need your support for the Medicine Man Gallery channel, so make sure to click the subscribe button and tap the little bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, which we do every morning on Wednesday and Friday. See you soon.